Well, Tyler Whipkey is our first preacher here today. His mentor is unable to be here, but she furnished a few remarks. So Tyler's a second-year seminary student who has served the church in several capacities during his lifetime. For the last year, he's been student pastor at South Joplin Christian Church, Disciples of Christ in Joplin, Missouri. And during his time at South Joplin, Tyler has proven to be creative, committed, and willing to risk himself as he tries new things. He is hungry to learn and grow as a person in faith and as a minister. He not only has a faithful presence in worship, leadership, but also a faithful heart. And this comes from Jill Cameron Michael, his mentor. So Tyler, we welcome you now and look forward to hearing the word you have for us.
Good morning. This morning I'll be reading from the Gospel of Luke, the 13th chapter, beginning in verse 10. Now he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. And just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. She was bent over and quite unable to stand up straight. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." When he laid his hands on her, immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, kept saying to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be healed, and not on the Sabbath day." But the Lord answered him and said, "You hypocrites! Does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey and lead it away from the manger to give it water? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has bound for 18 long years, be set free from this bondage on the Sabbath day?" When he said all this, his opponents were put to shame, and the entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things that he was doing. The word of the Lord for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
My sister is a good person, but she's had a pretty rough life. Decades ago, she had an accident. We were running through a field one day, as we did each day, and we came to a wall. I climbed over the wall and was running, and in her hurry to get over to catch me, she lost her balance and fell on her back. Ever since then, she hasn't been able to stand up straight. The pain gets to be so much that most nights I hear her weeping. Before the fall, she was such an active person. Mother always had to keep an eye on her because she was always running around here and there, getting into things that she shouldn't. Every day when Father would come in from the fields, she was always right there at the door, waiting on him to give him a hug. But after the accident, Mother didn't have to worry about chasing her around anymore because she couldn't run like she used to. After the accident, the hugs that she gave Father, They just weren't the same. After her fall, it's almost as though she just gave up on life. For the past 18 years, I had to sit and watch my sister's joyful spirit take a back seat to the reality that she'd never walk like you and me. She'd never be able to run through a field with me again. She would never be able to sit up straight and take in a sunset with a husband that she would never have. She would never be able to hold a child in her arms like a woman should. When she walks, she has to use a cane. Otherwise, she could fall over. She always looks at the ground, seeing and following the footsteps that other people have made, but rarely making any of her own through life. But all of that changed one Sabbath day. My sister and I were headed toward the synagogue like we usually did on that day of the week, and as we neared the synagogue, I heard an unfamiliar voice. I had never heard this teacher before. It was obvious that he must be from out of town or traveling, but he wasn't one that usually spoke to us here. As we walked along, the only people who really paid attention to my sister and I were the small children. They were the only ones who were still in awe that someone could live in such pain and in such an estate. Her bent-over form and me walking beside her to support her as we shuffled through the thoroughfares had long ago become commonplace here. Nobody was interested in talking to us. No man showed a romantic interest in her. Mother and father were both dead. And up until today, that one Sabbath day, I thought I was the only one who cared about her. As I helped my sister into the synagogue, I couldn't help but realize there was something different about the way this man spoke. He carried authority, almost like he had a personal interest in what he was saying. It was intoxicating. And I wasn't the only person who thought so. As I looked around, I saw other people just gazing at this new teacher, hanging on every word that came out of his mouth. Then suddenly, he stopped talking. It took me a moment to realize what was going on, and as I looked up, I found him staring at my sister. She grasped my hand even tighter. What's going on? Why has he stopped talking? Is something wrong? I was so unsure I couldn't even reply. Then this strange new man began making his way toward us. He stopped just a few feet away and said, "Come here." Surely there was somebody behind us that he was talking to instead of us. Nobody ever paid any attention to us. Then again, this time pointing at my sister, he said, "Come here." What does he want? I didn't know. But something drew us in. As we approached him, I looked into his eyes, and I saw something there that I had not seen in such a very long time. Compassion. Love. He gazed at my sister, and for a moment, I thought that he was going to shed a tear for her. Then he said the words that will be forever burned into my memory. "Woman, you are healed from your ailment." Then he placed his hand on her back, the same spot that she had fallen 18 years ago. The same spot that robbed her of her joy. The same spot that caused her so much pain. And when he lifted his hands up, I couldn't believe what I saw. Slowly, tentatively, my sister began to stand up straight. My sister, who had been bent over for 18 years, was now standing up straight, just like everybody else gathered there. Slowly, she took a step, and then another. And then she actually ran around the synagogue, praising God for the healing that this man had just brought her. All that I could do was just sit and stare and cry at what I had just seen. That morning, my sister was a nobody, without a single person in the world who cared about her except for me. But now she had met this teacher who had taken an interest in her, shown her compassion, and healed her. I stood there wiping tears from my eyes, watching her run like I hadn't seen her do in nearly 2 decades, praising God. But our joy was short-lived. The leader of the synagogue was furious. There are 6 days on which work and healing ought to be done. Come on those days and be healed, not the Sabbath. And as I looked around, I saw some heads nodding in agreement with him. And he was right. Every good Jew knows that any kind of work or healing ought not be done on the Sabbath day. Didn't Moses, when he came down from the mountain, tell us that himself? And yet this teacher, who had to know that, healed her anyway. Why? Why would he do such a thing? This Jesus of Nazareth, that was his name, he was quick with a response. You hypocrites! Doesn't each of you on the Sabbath day take your livestock away from the manger to give them water? Why then should this woman, the daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has bound for 18 long years, not be healed on this day? Not be set from bondage on this Sabbath day? He looked around at each and every face, and no one had a response. Who was this man? I knew at that point in time that if he asked me to, I would follow him anywhere. The compassion and authority that radiated from him was simply irresistible. I looked over at my sister and found her sitting on the ground, gazing up at this man with tears in her eyes. He cared about her. This man cared enough about my sister to heal her on the Sabbath. And maybe he was right. Wasn't this an appropriate day for healing? The day when God rested from creative activity, saw all that was good in the world? Why shouldn't good be done on this day? Why shouldn't all of Abraham's children be permitted to rest on this day? And shouldn't that include my sister? Why should some have to endure the pain and the suffering that they do simply because the calendar doesn't allow them to experience the freedom? As I thought about that day, I realized that he wasn't only unbinding my sister, He was unbinding the Sabbath. He was helping us see what it really meant to live in communion with God. That was 5 years ago. This Jesus of Nazareth has been crucified in Jerusalem. But there are rumors that he actually was the Son of God. And I can't help but wonder what that does for the world. How many more people like my sister are out there? They may not have a physical handicap, but that doesn't matter. How many people are hungry today? How many people are longing for wholeness? How many people don't believe they have anything left to live for? That teacher is gone now, but I'm not, and neither are you. My sister would have never been made whole if he hadn't looked through the false piety that we thought was righteousness and show us that God cares more about making us complete and whole than tying us down to rules and restrictions. God gave us the Sabbath, a day to love Him deeply. How better to do that than to love one another?